Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. What started as all things related to brain health and wellness has morphed into largely brain injury health and wellness, with occasional other neurological topics. My mission remains the same, to help you on the path to a healthier brain. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Barry Miller. Dr. Miller has over 25 years of higher education experience that includes research, teaching, and administrative roles. For the past 7 years, he has served as the Director of Outreach and Business Development for the Virginia Tech Hemet Lab. His educational background includes anatomy, exercise physiology, strength and conditioning, and biomechanics. He has a PhD in biomechanics from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Woohoo, go Gophers! And an MBA in finance from the University of Delaware. He serves as a reviewer for several injury biomechanics research journals and co-authored several journal papers and a sport and fitness nutrition textbook. He enjoys an active lifestyle that includes regular fitness activities, pickleball, golf, and home improvement projects. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining me, Barry.
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks for having me, and happy to share what we do with our listeners. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right on in.
Absolutely. So, being someone that's not super familiar with my podcast, my first question to everybody is always a little backstory. Like, what got you into doing what you're doing now?
Well, interestingly enough, so the founders of the Virginia Tech Hemet Lab, Dr. Steve Rosen and Dr. Stefan Duma, are injury biomechanics guys, but they got their start in auto safety. And they really wanted to study head injuries. They were doing airbags, seatbelts, the typical auto safety stuff, early 2000s. But they really want to study some head injuries. And, when you do a car crash, you got, maybe one cadaver, or if you have a test dummy, maybe you can do it a few times, but you're still crashed. It's just not a big sample size, and it's not living tissue. And they said, and Stefan had just went to a conference where they were putting sensors inside military helmets. And Stefan said, maybe we could do that. And so, who can we put who can we measure? Well, football players hit their heads all the time, and we don't have to ask them to do it, right? So the IRB process is much easier. And so Coach Beamer allowed us to put sensors inside the football helmets as long as we were flies on the wall. You don't want to mess with the Division I football team. You can't disrupt anything. So in doing so, they were started to collect data for, a couple of years. Then Lester from the equipment room asked Steve, said, hey, can you help me pick a safer helmet? And Steve said, well, we're putting sensors in just the helmet models that we have here at Virginia Tech. Steve goes, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we should buy all the commercially available football helmets. Let's test them and see what we get. Well, we found huge differences in helmet performance. And they're all certified. And I can go into what, helmets are certified on a pass-fail basis, et cetera. But they found huge differences. And Steve said, this shouldn't be information we keep to ourselves. He said the public should have this. And then, so the idea for the Virginia Tech football star ratings was born. And that was Steve's actually dissertation. So Steve was one of Dr. Duma's first PhD students. And so he's the one that kind of developed the whole thing. And, started with football, youth football. Now we have 9 sports and 1 construction industrial helmet rating. It's not all we do. We're a comprehensive injury biomechanics lab. So we do other things besides helmets. But that's certainly our bread and butter and what we're best known for.
Yeah. And so as we were talking before I hit record, I got introduced to you because of Seth from Burn Peak watching YouTube. If anybody else is listening to the show watches the YouTubers, we do a lot of mountain biking in our house. So my kids, my husband, everybody's into the biking. And we were watching that episode, saw you in the interview there. And that's what really got me looking at it, because I work as a concussion specialist. So I take care of concussions day in and day out and head injuries. And I'm constantly talking to people about how they can prevent their head injuries. And a helmet is a great way. It's not 100% effective because we can't stop all the activity in the brain itself. But what's the benefit of having a helmet that has a rating versus one that doesn't have a rating?
So we'll start with all sport helmets have to be certified by some organization. Bike helmets are certified by the Consumer Product Safety Committee here in the United States. Snow Sport, American Society for Testing Material, football, NOXI. So they all have their organizations. These certifications are pass or fail, and the threshold to pass is the point of catastrophic head injury, which is really, really important. It means I wore that snow sport helmet or that equestrian helmet or that bike helmet, and I get into an accident participating in that given activity, I shouldn't come away with a skull fracture or death for most situations, right? We supplement those mandatory required certifications with sport-specific helmet ratings. So we really figure out, how do you really hit your head playing football? How do you hit your head when you fall off your bike? And we come up with these test protocols that best represent those real world accident scenarios, and they're repeatable here in the lab. And then we acquire commercially available models and we test the helmets against that protocol. And then we rank order them on our webpage. So we've really revolutionized helmet performance. Is what companies do is they use our test protocol, which is the blueprint to improve helmets. So if you do well on our test protocol, you actually do well in the real world because our protocols represent real world accident scenarios. The certifications are fairly primitive at this point in time. They only use linear acceleration and skull fracture as a criteria. They have not looked at rotational head kinematics just yet. They all talk about it, but they haven't done it. So we're a little bit more flexible. We're cutting edge. Yeah, and so that's kind of what we do as far as the STAR ratings go. I guess want me to describe STAR for everybody?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So STAR is an acronym that we use. We stole it from the auto industry. It's where Steve and Stefan got their start, right? So STAR stands for the summation of tests for the analysis of risk. And so what we're going to do is we're going to combine all these fancy tests into one overall number. And so I'll use football as an example. So for football, we figured out after years and years of studying football impacts, video, sensors, etc. There's generally 4 locations and 3 energy levels that football players hit their head. There's a multitude, right? There's a range, but those 12 test conditions is a really comprehensive evaluation of that. So for each test condition, we're going to calculate something. So I'm going to say front of the head at low energy, we'll call that test condition number 1. So we're going to do our tests. We're going to collect the peak linear and rotation head acceleration numbers. And then based on those numbers, we're going to calculate a risk of concussion using our bivariate risk function that was developed using football players. It has over 2 million data points, so pretty comfortable with that. And then we're going to take that risk of concussion number and we're going to multiply by some sort of weighting or exposure value. Low energy, front of your head, well, in football, it happens a lot more frequently than the other 11 test conditions. So it's going to get a heavier weighting or exposure value, which is a standardized number that we figure out. So risk of concussion times that number gives us what we call an incidence value. We do that for all 12 test conditions, and then we sum all those incidence values, summation of tests, analysis of risk, and that gives you an overall STAR score. And here's the important part. So the STAR score for everything represents some sort of concussion risk for the sports anyways. And so you want a low STAR score. And then based on the STAR score, we're going to put you in some general bins, a 5-star category, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 being the best. So low STAR score is really good. Lower the better, because that represents concussion risk or the sport helmets. So that's how it works. And so every sport is unique. You cannot compare STAR scores to football, to bike helmets, to snow sport helmets, to hockey, because they're evaluated different. The test protocols are different. The test rigs we use, the impact energies, the impact surfaces, all that changes based on the sport. So you can't interchange them. And we generally recommend a 4 or 5-star rated headgear or helmet on the webpage. 5 obviously is preferred, but pretty good. Depends on what you're exposed to. How good of a helmet do you need, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like if you're a commuter and you drive your car every day, well, there's a few things to consider, right? My exposure is going to be really high because I'm traveling every day with lots of traffic. So I want the safest car I can get, but gas mileage, fuel economy, comfort, those are other things to consider too. I don't think a helmet's any different. So depending on what you do, use impact performance as a criteria in choosing your helmet. Obviously, price usually comes number 2, seems like, but
Yeah.
But you can get some really good helmets at very low cost. So cost is not indicative of performance.
Yeah.
You'll see that on the website. There's some great bike helmets for like under $100. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, when we first looked at it to see how the helmets that we had already, how they rated on there, I was pleased to see that some of the helmets that we had in our garage were on the website. So I knew the ratings of them, and they weren't expensive helmets because I don't have that kind of money. But it makes sense too why different sports would have different ratings. Because like in cycling, if you crash, you're technically supposed to take that helmet out of commission, right? But in football, they don't after every crash.
Yeah, those are multi-impact helmets versus single-impact helmets. I'll mention this because I get this question a lot via emails. When should I replace my single-impact helmet? Well, if you had a major accident and you suspect any deformation any cracks, crumbling of your helmet shell liner, which is typically EPS, then yes, I would say you should probably replace it. If you drop it once in a while, dropping is not going to damage it. And EPS holds up really, really well. There's a couple papers out there that even after 20 years, the impact performance of an EPS helmet is probably pretty close to what it's originally designed to. So, EPS is lightweight, waterproof, UV proof. And for the most part, you can change the density so it's really cheap for one, and they can make whatever geometries they want out of it. So EPS tends to be the go-to padding material for single impact helmets. But there's a lot of technologies out there. You'll see them. They're obviously not as cheap as EPS, but they're being incorporated and they're out there.
I'm trying to think of what I want to say next. My thought was there and then it was gone.
Why do the helmet companies recommend changing your helmet every 3 to 5 years? Was that it?
Yes, that's a good one. Thank you.
I get that question a lot too. Well, technological advances are true. And if you looked at our helmet ratings page, you would notice that, the helmets keep getting better and better. And we had to rescale this past July because all the helmets were all the new ones that came out were in the 5-star category. And we're like, well, our job is to differentiate. So we just rescale. We don't change how we tested the helmets, just what is considered a 5-star based on overall market performance, right? So, but yeah, your helmet will last a long time. Again, there's probably some really good ones and better ones on our webpage that you could buy, but they don't break down very easily. So they will last. And again, what type of riding are you doing? How often are you riding? What's the duration? What are you exposed to? So factor all that into your decision making. But I obviously tell you, buy the best helmet you can. You only have one brain. That's probably what you would say too, Mandy, right?
Yep.
Why take that chance when it's for $89, $79? Yes. But, if you're riding once a month and you're going to the mailbox and back, well, your exposure is pretty minimal, right? So.
Yeah. So somebody doing like street biking versus mountain biking would probably have a different function for their helmet.
Yeah. What am I in traffic or not in traffic? Yeah. So what kind of velocity am I moving at? Right. So all those play a factor. Yes.
Yeah. What are a couple of the other common things that you get asked about the different helmets?
Well, I will say that MIPS technology, now I'll explain those. So MIPS is one of several rotational mitigating technologies. So the basic MIPS version is a little slip plane between your head and the helmet. And so when you wear a helmet, even a football helmet, you want the helmet to decouple from your head during an accident. Just like the crush zone in your automobile, you want the car to absorb energy and move independently before it moves you, the driver. If you can increase impact duration, you reduce those peak linear and rotational values, which reduces injury risk, right? Obviously, a car is very different than a helmet, but this principle still applies. So you want the helmet, during an impact, you want the helmet to get hit and move it a little, slide around on your head before it takes your head with it. Well, that MIPS layer might allow the helmet to move a little bit easier, rotate on your head a little bit easier. It's not going to do anything for linear protection because there's no absorbing materials with it. So it may help in certain scenarios. It's not a bad technology, but most of the time it's probably benign. It kind of depends on how you hit your head. But there's other padding materials, these honeycomb structures like Wave Cell, Coroid, 720 Protections has a Hexago technology, and then there's 3D printed. Also these lattice structures that kind of, carbon 3 or whatever. All those materials, the geometry of those, if you think about EPS for the most part, kind of a uniform shape. When you hit that from a perpendicular, I'm showing Manny, I know your viewers can't see this, but you hit it perpendicular, all it can really do is crush, right? Or compress.
Yeah.
If I hit that same spot at an angle, right? It's a little harder for it to compress or crush. If I had a geometrical structure like a honeycomb or a lattice structure, those can bend, twist, and absorb energy from a greater range of angles just by the nature of the way they're built, right? The structure of them. And so they call them rotation mitigating technologies. That doesn't necessarily mean they're better because most the impact protection is really based on the density and thickness of that padding material, right? If it's too hard, too soft, it's not going to do much anyways. But if it's the right density and thickness and the geometry is there, it'll add to the performance of the helmet. So that's one thing. Yeah, a couple things actually for helmet, as far as helmet design. And then there's also a new technology that has a slip plane, kind of like MIPS, but it's on the outside of the helmet. If your viewers went to our ratings page, bicycles, Hexer is the technology, and something release layer is the kind of the technology they call it. Basically, there's these beads that are encompassed in some thin plastic, and the beads in the outer plastic just shear off. And so they allow the decoupling, the helmet doesn't go anywhere. That stuff just absorbs the energy for the rotation. It does fantastic. And so those are
Interesting.
number 1 and 2, and you guys can just Google those or go to the webpage, then you can go to Hexer Technology or click on those helmet models. You go, oh, and they'll have a website, and you'll say, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's cool stuff.
some exciting stuff. And those are the latest, greatest technologies out there.
Yeah. Now, football. So we just had the Super Bowl. Some of the players are out there. They had the Guardian caps on. I saw you have the Guardian caps on the website or coming or something with that. What have you seen with the benefit of the Guardian caps? Is there a benefit?
Yep. So we have a report on our webpage, as a matter of fact. It's called the Shell Add-on Report. There's also a link to a full peer-reviewed research article on the Shell add-ons. Basically, what we found is this, that if you're wearing a high-performing football helmet, you might get a little augmentation with a Shell add-on. The American football helmet is the most advanced sport helmet on the market, and they are fantastic, the top-performing ones. Adding a little more padding tends to help a little bit, and you'll see that on the report. If you have a average performing helmet, you're going to get a little bit more improvement, right? So if you drive the car, they don't make any more and then you had a big foam circle around your car, you might get some better impact performance, right, than the car by itself. So the same is true. Most of the performance is going to come from the helmet itself, but the Guardian cap, the standard version, did okay. There's something called the Safer Sport Shell add-on. That one did a little bit better. And then there's an NFL version that actually did better than the Safer Sport. So it's a little stiffer and harder, but you can't buy that one because it's for the NFL players. We're in the process of doing a paper for the youth Shell add-ons, where we did all kinds of combinations, padded to padded, padded to bare, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll say this, there's an opportunity for those to be tuned for the youth athletes, but they are not tuned for the youth athletes at this point in time. So, it probably wasn't fair to us to evaluate them against a youth football helmet because they're not designed for a youth football helmet, right? But, there's a lot of demand for these things. And so I think there's opportunity if the density and thickness needs to be appropriate for those impact scenarios. The youth players hit a lot lower energies than the adults, right? Or the NFL players for that matter, right? So it makes a difference what density you're using.
Yeah, yeah. So me being the big brain nerd that I am, when I was watching the Super Bowl, there was I can't remember if it was an advertisement or something just during the game, they were talking about how the helmets have changed over time. So when we look at the helmets that are used now, they are so much more technological than they were 10, 20 years ago. So that being said, on the rating system, how frequently do you guys update the ratings?
We rescaled the football helmets along with the bike helmets this past July. So yes, they were all 5-star we were well overdue to rescale. So they've gotten so much better. Even in the 8 years I've been here, it's fantastic. So just to give your listeners an understanding. So the star score for varsity football helmets represents the average number of concussions we would expect to see if that player was wearing that helmet model and exposed to the seasonal average of 410 packs, which are modeled by the test procedures here in our lab. The star scores for those top 5, 10 helmets have star scores under 1.0. So less than 1 concussion per season on average, right? So that's how good the helmets are at absorbing energy. There's a lot that goes into football players. So, as a result of our research 10 years ago, the way they practice, the impact drills they do have all changed. We know that, hey, you want to minimize your head. Avoid head contact at all costs. The helmet is the last line of defense. They're a little bit better about rules and spearing and things like that. So there's been a lot of education on. I don't know that too many football players playing high school football are unaware of the risk of concussions and our helmet ratings and how important it is to wear a high quality helmet and just don't try to avoid hitting your head as best you can. It's a tackling sport. And so, yes, they've gotten much, much better. Back to your original question. How good are the helmets? Are fantastic. Youth helmets are fantastic. The varsity helmets are fantastic. I don't know how much better they can get without a huge geometrical change in the helmets. And then how big can they get with still playing the game in the same way? We can make a helmet that's almost concussion proof.
Yeah.
Well, we could drive
Yeah.
a car and it's
Right.
almost, yeah, injury proof.
Almost.
Yeah,
Almost. You
almost.
still have that little sloshing of the brain back and
Yep.
forth,
There's
though,
always
so
going
that
to
we
be
can't
risk,
prevent
but
it all.
it's right.
Yeah. So I grew up out in the country. We had horses all the time. I never wore a helmet a day in my life on a horse. And you've got equestrian helmets on there as well.
Yep.
What can you tell me about the use of helmets in equestrian?
Improving.
Yeah.
When we first launched the equestrian helmet ratings, what's that, 4 or 5 years ago now? It goes by quick. We really focused on the hunter jumper injury scenarios, not horse racing. We
Mhm.
thought that was a separate category, but the FEI, the Federation Equestrian International, really wanted to include horse racing accidents where there's a lot of horizontal velocity. Well,
Mhm.
that kind of changes how you're going to test a helmet. So we just added what we call oblique impacts that kind of simulate those high velocity impacts. We've already done it for bike helmets and snow sport, but we said, let's include their recommendation, and we'll include some oblique impacts. That test protocol is now probably the most robust as far as using both pendulum driven, linear driven impacts as well as the oblique testing. Two different test rigs. In general, what we found when we first launched, and this is true for almost all the sport helmet ratings, that the helmets are just too stiff when we first test them, because the only thing they're testing to prior to us is the certification, which is a high energy. I got to pass the certification to be legally sold, right? And so they're really stiff for that. High energy, right? So low energy, you want nice soft pillows. High energy, you got to have mattresses or something thicker, right? Same thing with, these certifications. They're high energy to stop skull fractures. The material, the padding material, is kind of dense usually. You got to pass that. But additionally, if you want to do well in our test, you got to have some more compliant materials to reduce concussion risk. And so the helmets evolve really quickly. So yeah, the better helmets tend to be a little bit more, a little softer, a little more compliant, and probably a little thicker too. Right?
Mhm.
So yeah, they're improving. There's some, again, I think some of the technologies we spoke about previously are getting incorporated. Some of the wave cell and the lattice structures, et cetera. So continued improvement, but wearing a helmet is still the most important piece of almost all the situations.
Yeah. Yep. And then we've got the Winter Olympics going on. So what's different about the winter sports helmets?
They're much different beside, bike helmets and snow sport helmets are pretty similar. We don't use friction with the snow sport helmet testing because snow and ice really doesn't have friction. We use, oblique impacts, high velocity. So we do a 35 and a 55 degree for the snow sport helmets. Yeah, they're pretty similarly built. The density and thickness of the padding materials. Obviously, they also have a little bit more thermal layers, so that may help as well. But I don't think structurally there's a huge difference. Typically in those helmets, the way they're designed, aerodynamics might be a little bit more important for the racing style helmets. But
Is there anything that surprised you as you guys were doing the testing with any of the helmets?
well, if we want to move to the construction industry, so that certification does not use a catastrophic head injury test parameter, right? It's not pass
Interesting.
fail. It's a different test that's not indicative of skull fracture death. So for that test protocol, we use both a skull fracture risk and a concussion risk. Um, there's two types of helmets in the construction world, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 do not have chin straps or typically have peripheral padding. Type 2, they call them safety helmets, have a chin strap and have peripheral padding, and obviously those do much better than type 1s when we start looking at impact protection. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of injuries in the worksite environments, and typically the helmets don't stay on the head. So our message really is, if you're exposed to falls, trips and falls, you want to probably have a helmet that stays on your head for one, and then one that has some peripheral padding that does pretty well. So those helmets are advancing quickly already. We just added two to the website, and they're in the top 3. So they're improving fast as well. Now that they have a design tool, they can make the helmet safer. Other things that are surprising about surprising me. Bike helmet, it is surprising. There's going to be a new bike helmet that'll be number 1 that is quite a bit lower than the current number 1, and that is fantastic. That surprised us. I can't tell you what it is and why it did so well, but yeah, they keep evolving, which is better and better for the consumer, right? So
When is that one coming out?
I thought they said February, but I don't know what their delay is. So soon, yes, if you have something good and you know it's going to be number 1.
Any day now. Yeah.
marketing and distribution and manufacturing to get all aligned. But yeah, so they're close, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you tell the person that's right now looks out in their garage and they've got for whatever sport a helmet that is not listed on your website, it doesn't have a rating?
Product differentiation. So we have some helmets in the lab that are from the 90s. And some of those helmets are just really, really stiff. Generally, we say that any helmet's better than no helmet. But if they're so stiff that they don't crack, crush, crumble, or break on impact, they're not going to do you much good. The current helmets are fantastic. And again, you can get one for under $100. So if you're going to be riding, um, I would strongly consider making the investment and getting a newer helmet. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe your helmet in your garage did well as far as impact protection. We wouldn't know until we actually tested it. But if
Right.
it feels really hard, if you can't pinch the foam and it gives a little bit, and it's just really rock hard, you're like, that's probably not for me. Right.
Mhm.
So you want to be able to pinch that foam, or it's probably foam, it's probably EPS. If it has a little give, that's probably a good indication it's much better than some of the really hard, stiff ones.
Yeah. And what about those people who still say that they don't want to wear a helmet? What would you say to them?
Well, there's stats out there, a lot of injury statistics. I don't have my bike helmet poster behind me, but I think there's like a 80% reduction in concussion risk wearing any helmet versus no helmet. And unfortunately, I'm the bearer of a lot of bad emails. I got into an accident and I have these issues, long-term issues. I still can't take light. I still can't read. Yeah, unfortunately, one small accident, it's probably not half the time, it's not even your fault. Right.
Yeah.
So you're exposed to something and it happens. So, and I cringe every time I read these. Sometimes they say, well, luckily I had a 5-star rated helmet on and I'm alive. Right.
Yeah.
Even though major damage, but I'm alive. So, got to take care of your brain. If you only have one, as Mandy and I was talking earlier, we haven't figured
Yeah.
out how to replace those just yet.
Yeah.
It'll be before our
Not
lifetimes are over.
successfully.
Won't be before our lifetimes are over. Yeah.
Not even close. No. I forget. Do you guys have motorcycle helmets
We
rated?
do not. We've done some preliminary stuff where hopefully you're working with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. They
Yeah.
helped fund the original bike helmet study. So they're interested in motorcycle helmets, and we are. And globally, there's a lot of interest in motorcycle helmets. So we would love to launch that. A big part of my job is getting the funding to run these star ratings and to conduct the research. What we do is not cheap, unfortunately. It takes time, energy, and personnel. So so we're hopefully that'll happen. We're doing some stuff with Major League Baseball. They gave us a grant to study catcher's mask impacts. We came out with youth hockey not long ago. Youth bike is on the horizon. One of our PhD students is working on that. So that'll come out. What else we work at? Rugby. We have been working with Leeds Beckett University in England on some rugby head impact sensor data. So
Nice.
come out with rugby headgear ratings here, hopefully this summer. So you keep adding to the portfolio and all good stuff for all you consumers out there that need to wear headgear for whatever things you like to do.
Yeah.
Hockey in Minnesota, if you're
Yeah.
skating, all good stuff.
Yep. Our high school team is in the playoffs right now, so that's definitely something to look at as well.
The
Yeah.
hockey
There's so
helmet,
many.
I was gonna say the hockey helmets have a lot of room for improvement still.
I would
That
believe that.
sport, the vanity in that sport is kind of surprising. Right?
Hmm.
They want to look good. They don't want this offset of kind of how bulky the helmets are. Well, a little bit of added padding goes a long, long way. The number one helmet has been the number one since we launched, which is disappointing. We
Wow.
typically don't see that. We see someone else surpass that by leaps and bounds. So there's still a lot of opportunity for hockey helmet improvement.
Yeah. Well, then they get in fights and they rip their helmets off anyway. So
Or they take them off on purpose. It's the
yeah.
gentleman's league. Well, if we're going to fight, we shouldn't fight with helmets on.
Yeah. There's a whole nother conversation I think we could have right there. Uh, any other projects or anything else that you guys have coming up that we haven't talked about yet?
So other things we do, I said we're a comprehensive injury biomechanics lab. So
Yeah.
the Hasbro toy company contracts with us. They're the makers of Nerf toys. So we test all the Nerf products for eye injury assessments. So
Cool.
the darts, you name it, we test them. And then I have 2 boys. So when you buy the Nerf toys, right, you lose all the original Nerf darts in a matter of days, stuck in the bushes, in the gutters, wherever they go. And then you buy the next version, and you probably don't know this, but the knockoff versions are very different when it comes to safety than the original Nerf products. The
Yeah.
knockoffs are usually harder plastic. They're not the soft rubber compliant, and that's why they're cheaper. But you should buy the better ones unless you're going to give your kids goggles and make them wear safety goggles or eyewear. Dr. Duma actually works with their attorneys to figure out Do we put goggles in the box? What's the language on the box? Or do we just need to flat out slow these guns down when they shoot these projectiles? Dr. Duma also is responsible for all the water park eye injury assessments. So all water parks use the velocities, et cetera, that he researched and said, yeah, safe under this level, safe under that level. So they all used his research. So he's our eye injury expert.
That's
and
cool.
Then another area that we do, so everyone's familiar with all these drones flying around. So
Yep.
we are a FAA-approved impact protection facility for the FAA in conjunction with our Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership. And so we crash drones into windshields and body parts and things like that. So yes, we assess drone impacts. And they don't have a lot of rules just yet, like how fast should they go or be allowed to go? What are they made of? Are they frangible? In other words, they fall apart easily when they hit something. The geometry of those make a big difference. So you're getting hit with the boom or you get hit with fuselage. Do they have any padding on at all? The blade length, blade speed, blade composition makes a huge difference as far as laceration. So we do all that testing for them. We do the little light show ones too. So those fly really fast. If you guys have never been to a light show, go to one. It's really cool what they do. The music and the formations, but it's up to 20,000 of these at a time in the air.
Oh
Some of these major events. It's crazy. But they do fail and they fly 40, 50 miles an hour. Hard plastic typically. So yes, we do drone impact testing as well.
Well, I would never have even thought about that, but
We've got to
now
do
you
it.
say it. Yeah. I just see them every once in a while floating over our neighborhood. And I've never even thought about what happens if they fail and come down on you. That makes sense. Sometimes I feel like we should just wear helmets when we're walking around in everyday life.
So I have some friends in Delaware when we lived there, and we had a couple storms, I would call them microbursts, maybe tornado warnings, and he would put his kids in football helmets and go down into the basement. We laughed and laughed and laughed, but hindsight, that wasn't necessarily a horrible idea. Just for 5 minutes, you got to wait for the tornado to pass.
It's not such a bad idea. Yeah. I'm a bit of a klutz myself, so my friends always joke that I need to be in bubble wrap and a helmet at all times.
Yeah.
And I joked with one of my patients the other day that they either needed to be more cautious on stairs or they needed to wear a helmet at home.
Yeah.
So, we might have to get one of those everyday helmets and get some ratings on those at some point.
Interesting you said that. I didn't mention this, but Nicole Stark is one of our research faculty here. She's our latest addition. She did some studies with the elderly and falls in residential facilities. And we're also launching some research into the special need residents at these, full-time care facilities, kids that bang their heads. And so we're going to look at some of that stuff as well, because that's a problem. It's hard to keep your kid, if your kid is autistic and some of these kids with other problems. So, so we're working on that as well. So
very cool.
I don't know if that's every day, but for some people it's every day.
For some people it is. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about any of the projects that you guys work on?
You can just Google Virginia Tech helmet ratings. You can go to vt.edu/helmet. You can go to YouTube and just go Virginia Tech helmet ratings, and we're pretty much plastered everywhere. So, and my contact information is on the website as well. So if you have specific questions you want someone to chat with, I'm happy to do that. So I answer lots and lots of emails.
Very cool. And I will put those links in the show notes as well so people can click on them and find you guys. Any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with? Yeah.
Under technical documents on the webpage, you can find the test protocols, the research articles. There's a publications page if you want to look at any of the other research we put out that are listed on there. So the technical documents, usually a lot of questions are answered just by looking at those and reading through those, the peer-reviewed articles. So saves me a few emails.
Yeah. For sure. So I will make sure that I can probably put a link to that on the show notes as well. So very cool. Thank you so much for your time today, Barry.
You're welcome, Manny. Thanks for having us, and you keep it safe out there, everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it so that others can benefit. Please also consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to catch the latest info and get links on all of the social medias there. See you next time.